discussing theater, production, philosophy, and pedagogy. Presented by Mississippi Repertory Theater. Welcome to The Dramatic Dialogue. Here's your host, Patrick Hudson. Welcome back to The Dramatic Dialogue. I'm Patrick Hudson, your host, and we are here today with Kenny Davis, the house manager at Barter Theater in beautiful Abington, Virginia. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
First of all, I would like to say and disclose to the podcast viewers that I have a bias for Barter. I consider myself a member of the Barter family. I spent a year in Abington, and I love this theater. I had the pleasure of working with Kenny there, so I call Kenny both a colleague and a friend, and I'm so excited to have him as our first guest here on The Dramatic Dialogue. Kenny, I wanted to just start out by talking a little bit about yourself. Maybe where you grew up, how you ended up at Barter, kind of start that story, and then we can talk a little bit about Barter. But let's start with Kenny.
I was raised in Michigan until I was 8 years old, but let's put a pin in when I was 3. That's when my grandmother started taking me to theater for young audiences, much like the Barter players have here at Barter. Started at 3 years old, we would go to one play a month and lived there till I was 8. So I saw 70 plus shows before I was even 9 years old. And in addition to seeing shows with school also. I loved theater from very early on, would go into my bedroom and act things out that I had seen and all sorts of just improvising or trying to remember what was said. So the theater bug bit me really early on. Moved down to a place called Mouth of Wilson, Virginia. It's about an hour away from Abington here, and lived there from the time I was 8 until about 2014 when I moved here to take on the responsibilities of house manager. So,
Okay. So fell in love with the theater, ended up in Virginia, and in the beautiful part of Virginia, there in the Appalachian Mountains, and then ended up falling into house management. For the people who are listening today that may not know what a house manager is, can you tell us in like 1 or 2 sentences, what is a house manager?
a house manager's responsibility is to control the audience, their satisfaction, their safety, their easement of getting into the show, scanning tickets sometimes, making sure that everything runs smoothly and getting them to their seats and ensuring their safety. And that really encompasses a whole lot, but the overall sentence would really be just ensuring their enjoyment while they're there, while also ensuring their safety at the same time.
A lot of educational theaters that I work with and community theaters, they often don't have the opportunity to have a house manager, and so many of them don't understand the vital role they play. And I often say that the house manager really does the opposite of a stage manager, where a stage manager is taking care of the cast and the show and making sure everything's moving along correctly. The house manager is doing the exact same thing on the other side of the aisle, so to speak. Quite literally in many cases, taking care of audience members. So, as a patron, I'm going to show up at the theater, I'm going to buy a ticket, and at that very moment, or even if I may already have my tickets, at that very moment, my experience begins. And so you're going to be there in the lobby. You're going to be greeting people. I know this because I enjoy getting greeted by Kenny when I would come up every day to do the shows. I was fortunate at Barter that I got to work in the booth. So I got to see the shows from the front, just like the audience members. And so I got to walk through the lobby and get a Coke and a candy bar and head to the booth. Talk a little bit about why Barter.
Why Barter? That is a great question. And Barter, because in 2001, my grandmother and grandfather were bringing me to see my first show here. Unfortunately, Grandma got sick, was not able to join us, but my grandfather and I still came on. But why Barter? Because I first saw a show here in 2001. It was called Eleanor, an American Love Story. I love Eleanor Roosevelt, have read her autobiographies and biographies about her, and have always been very fascinated. So thought that would be a great show to see. It was a musical. Really enjoyed that. And then throughout the years between then and now, of course, have seen many, many shows. But it was always, even after that, I was in high school performances, more narrative about my why theater. Even for me, I got to participate in shows at church and also in high school and even in college. Though I didn't major in theater, they had one acts, and my friend that was directing said, "We need you to audition, please, please, please." I said, "Well, I'm not in the program. Doesn't matter. Please, well, I don't want to kick anybody out of that because, they're here for this. I'm not. No, please just do it." So I did. And so all through that time, I've just been really loving theater, being able to perform in shows. And interspersed with that, we would come to Barter. Even in high school, we came over to see a show. And so Barter has always been in the forefront of the local professional place to see shows. And I'd went on to college, and then while I was there, noticed that Richard Rose, the then producing artistic director, was coming to be part of sort of like a symposium with a couple other folks. And I thought, I'm going to go to that. I'm going to make this connection. I'm going to network a little bit. And got to introduce myself to them and express how much I enjoyed the shows there and everything. And I'd even seen at that point some shows. I'd seen a Broadway show. I had seen a couple Broadway tour shows, but somehow Barter always has a special way of telling that story with so much heart. So introduced myself to Richard Rose and expressed that I would be doing an internship. He asked, "Well, where are you doing it?" I said, "I don't have it figured out yet. Come do it at Barter. Here's my card." So, and the rest is history. I started in the marketing department in 2009, twice a week for 3 months, and then went on and did other customer service type work and managerial work, and kept in touch with the group sales manager at the time that had then moved into director of sales and services. Let her know, if ever a position opens up that you feel I would be a good fit for, please let me know. And it just so happened that she did. She loves to tell the story how she actually dreamt of putting me in this role, called me the next day because the person had put their notice in and said, "Hey, I just had this wild dream that our person quit and we need a house manager, and I called to offer you the job, and now I'm making it reality." And here I am. But why Barter? Because it's the nation's longest running professional theater since 1933. And the way in which they tell stories is just always so magical. I've seen other shows performed of the same that we've done here. And there's just something about the heart, the way we always get to the heart of the story and tell it, that is just so special. Not to mention the resident company members that you get to know and see frequently. That's one of my favorite parts of working here, is being able to see these great folks all the time and have become friends with them. I mean, if you would have told me a decade ago, it's been 10 years now that I've been here, in 2009, was here just for a short time. But if you would have told me all that time ago but I would be having lunch with some of these folks and dinner and attending opening night parties and stuff. Whoa, I still do have to pinch myself sometimes, as crazy as that may seem.
Yes, it's such a great resident company there. Let's talk a little bit about Barter's history. As you said, Barter opened its doors in 1933, located in the southwest corner of Virginia. How did theater come to the Appalachian Mountains?
That was brought to the Appalachian Mountains by a man by the name of Robert Porterfield. He was an out of work actor that was performing up on Broadway, and the Great Depression hit, leaving him and several of his actor friends without work and also without really a place to be anymore. He had returned to his apartment to realize that he now owned only the clothes that were on his back. He had been robbed. So he returned back to the family farm in Saltville, right up the road here from Abingdon, and encouraged some of his actor friends up there to find their way down here because he realized that folks had a hunger for entertainment. They had all this produce that was rotting in fields that they couldn't sell because folks didn't have money for it. So they sort of opened up the theater. He got with folks and they said, give him the old city hall and opera house. It used to be as well, originally built as a church back in 1831. And so they gave him that, and 20 of his actor friends joined him down here. They hitchhiked their way down here. And June 10th, 1933, they did their very first performance to a sold out audience. Why is it called Barter Theater, you might ask? Is because people would barter, trade their produce for what they coined with food you cannot sell, with produce you cannot sell, you can buy a good laugh. Trading ham for Hamlet, if you will. So that's sort of the start of theater here in Abingdon, the only regional theater outside of a metropolitan, the only professional theater outside of a metropolitan area.
That's right. It always was strange to me the first time I came to Abington to see such a small town and seeing such a large theater company sitting there in residence at the town. So the barter thing does continue. They still have barter days. Not every day, but once a year. Is it once a year, or a couple of times a year, something like that?
A couple times a year, right around our birthday, June 10th, we try to do each performance of the productions we do because this is probably a great opportunity and time to fill in here to add that we're also a repertory company.
That's right,
So
which is special.
and we have. Yeah, and we have two stages, two theaters, if you will. They're both barter theater, but we have a large space called Gillum Stage, and across the road, the whole space is called Smith Theater. And both of those spaces offer our audiences great shows with great quality. Smith Theater is just more intimate with 167 seats. So over the course of a weekend, you can catch a show in the afternoon, let's say, at Gillum, and at night, either stay over there and see the show that's happening over there or pop across the road here at Smith and see those shows. And the next day, see another one. So about three shows, maybe four, can be seen in a weekend now. So it's really neat to be able to see that.
That's what repertory theater means, right? It's that there are multiple shows, not just multiple theaters, each with its own show, but multiple shows in a single theater happening at any given time. So you can really travel up to Abington and on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday excursion, see 2, 3, maybe 4 shows, depending on what's running. If you have kids with you, definitely you could see a player show in the mornings. We'll talk about the barter players in just a second. And you'll be able to see, 2 different main stage or second stage shows over the course of the weekend. So it's a great opportunity if you love seeing good theater. And these are all produced by a resident company. Y'all do bring guests in. I know I worked at Barter before COVID, so when I say things, I say it with kind of the hesitation of, is this still the case? Theater's changed so much in the last 5 years, or it's actually been 7 years or so since I was at Barter, so it's been a while. And
Yeah,
but they bring in guests, but most of the work is done by a resident company that live there and kind of work there year round in Abington. And that's something special in theater. I know working in the business, it's kind of hard to settle into a small town and be gainfully employed. But that is one of the few opportunities you could have, a salaried, essentially theater job and decent benefits and be in a small town, a beautiful old town, and be able to travel pretty quickly to other places as well. So it's Barter is on its fourth artistic director now, right? Fourth,
that's correct.
Katie Brown, who took the reins from Rick Rose back a few years ago. Richard Rose, who was the artistic director that we both started under. And so Katie has taken over, and Katie's really continued to shape Barter into a theater. Now, Barter is a LORT theater, and for those who join the podcast and may not know, that means it's a League of Resident Theaters. There are currently 33, I believe, of them operating in the nation. Barter is the longest running professional theater, and the building, Gillum Stage, is one of the oldest still working theaters in the nation. It was built quite a while back. I don't know the exact year, but it's a pretty old building. And there have been some famous actors and actresses come across the Barter Stage. You want to mention a couple of those before we continue?
Absolutely. Gregory Peck, Ernest Borgnine, Patricia Neal, Francis Fisher, all of those folks got their start here right at Barter.
That's right. And Barter has, like I said, a big list. He could go on and on with all of the famous people that have graced the boards of the Barter stages. Like he said, there are two stages there, and both of them are great experiences. You can have the grand experience of the Gillum stage, or you can go across the street and experience the Smith Theater, which is a very intimate theater there across the street, and a beautiful walk across with a beautiful fountain and courtyards and gardens and stuff, and the Martha Washington Spa and Resort just across the street there in beautiful Abington. Now that we've talked a little bit about Barter, I want to get back to house management. A lot of
Sure.
people, when I was going into the industry and I was looking for resources, and I still see this in a lot of Facebook groups, people go, I want to know more about this specific role in the theater. And then they go to Google, they go to YouTube, and there's just not a lot of information, right? We kind of keep that stuff hidden so, I want, these questions are kind of geared toward that person who doesn't have that opportunity. If you were new to house management, you had to give someone one or two really great tips to go, hey, I've been assigned the role of house manager. I've never done it before, not in a professional capacity maybe, but I'm in a high school and now I'm the 10th grade house manager for our musical in the spring. What are some tips because you, I think, are a world-class house manager, guys, you don't understand the number of shows that Kenny deals with every year, and he deals with them all with the same smile and just happy demeanor, and that takes a special skill. And, if you could just bleed some of that knowledge off into the world and go, if I want to be a house manager, I've been thrown into the gaping world of house management. What is it that I need to know? Or what's a great tip that you're just like, hey, start here. And yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, in my experiences anyway, and it was just sort of reiterated today when we're doing these Appalachian festivals of plays and playwrights, we sort of have to gather information to share with the ushers. That is another part of my position as volunteer coordinator, but more to the point of house manager, it's my responsibility to know the house count, to also know the runtime of the show. If there's there's an intermission, when that intermission is going to hit, and all sorts of those things. It's very helpful if you can see a show before you house manage it. Not always a possibility, but I think one of the biggest things would be to build a rapport with the stage management team, because they're the ones that are going to have that information for you right out of the gate for you to be able to share with the audience, with the ushers. And so it's very imperative that you have a good, clear communication with that stage manager for each show that you're working. In our case, sometimes it's not always the same person. And in other cases, it's somebody that's been here for quite a while. So we're just never quite sure, but build a rapport with them, and that will certainly make things much smoother for everybody. And as you mentioned, I think it's just important to always remember what you're there for. Barter tries to always remind ourselves that we're in a service to our patrons and to our community. As much as we speak about customer service, it really is service to the community, from the stage all the way across the board with everything. At the end, it's just a service that we're giving to the audience. In this case, a very enjoyable, entertaining experience for them. So if you can face each show going in with that, that will help that friendly demeanor. And this is the reason I'm here to make sure these folks have a great time. Things are going to happen, but if we can, maybe a big tip I would give is take each show for what it is, each performance. Do it on a performance basis. That's not to mean don't look ahead a little bit here and there, but when you're doing that performance, just focus on that performance, what it is within those moments where you can connect with patrons in a special way, and making connections with them and providing them with the ultimate customer service experience at the same time.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. One of the things I like to ask everyone I talk to in the theater, when I was at Barter, this was my favorite moment, is I got to run the lighting console for all these performances. And so my favorite moment was the actual moment I hit the button and the house lights began to dim and you could feel the energy start buzzing in the room because they knew something special was fixing to happen. And that moment of anticipating that, of knowing that I was fixing to cause that to happen, or I was going to play a role in that. Do you have that same moment as a house manager that kind of repeats itself and go, oh, this is why I do this? This is.
I absolutely get that same sort of experience, yes. Because as you mentioned, it's sort of a process in getting to the theater. You get your ticket online, over the phone, in person. And then the next step, of course, is to wait in line until the house opens. And then that's when we take over. The stage manager hands over opens the house for us. And then we're on, if you will, to open those doors and let those eager patrons in. So yes, they're very excited to be here, to get to their seats, and just all a buzz in the lobby of being so excited for the show they're getting ready to see. Yes.
Absolutely. One of my favorite parts about Barter is the Barter players. They're the educational troupe that call Barter their home, and they become an integral part of operations for the theater and an integral part of theater education in this region. I was hoping you might expand and explain a little bit of about the Barter players, what they do, and how that contributes to the audiences that are coming through your doors to the main stage shows.
Well, I think it starts very much like it did for me at 3 years old, of that bug biting. It wasn't the Barter players that did that for me, but a very similar troupe up in Michigan. And once we get these young folks in here to enjoy these shows, and we don't play down to them, we don't dumb things down for them, we just present the shows as they are for these individuals. Of course, they are shortened, only about an hour long. But the Barter Players program sort of started as an apprenticeship program where folks fresh out of college could come and hone their craft, be mentored, and everything. And that's still a bit of the process. But a lot of the Barter players we have now have been here for quite some time now. many of them maybe before 2018, 2019. And boy, did they take us through a humongous, at the time, we just sort of did what we did and
That's right,
went
through
on with
COVID,
it.
yes.
But as we look back on it we were making history at a drive-in movie theater right up the
Yes.
road, where we did, a stage was built up on shipping containers. The audience stayed in their cars, in the safety of their cars, or right outside them in lawn chairs, but they were still spaced out so they weren't interacting with one another. And all safety protocols could be followed during COVID. But this group of Barter players formed what's called the Quarantine, and they got together and stayed there at the Barter Inn, and they were a bubble. They sort of moved together and did those shows and really helped us through the pandemic. But now that we're back, and that's in our history now, they're back to doing plays for young audiences, both here, sometimes at Gillum, sometimes at Smith. They're starting this year with Charlotte's Web, which has a special place in my heart because it's one of the shows that I saw years ago up in Michigan on a field trip. So they do all sorts of shows like that. And it's so special for them to be able to connect with these young audiences because, of course, there are future audiences. And it just, that's another thing that you mentioned just a bit ago of this is why I do this. When they're at Gillum, the buses park across the road at our Smith Theater parking lot and have to walk across. And helping these littles, as we call them,
Yeah.
cross the road, and sometimes high fives. We tie traffic up, it is what it is. And, just the high fives and how excited they are to be there. And even when they're leaving, talking about the show, how much fun they had. Like that just last Christmas, and it wasn't even for a Barter Player show, but there was a little fella, and he looked up at me and handed me his ticket. And he reminded me a lot of how I would have looked at that age. And I said, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 3." And it was just like a full circle moment for me. Like I'm
Wow, yeah.
almost getting choked up thinking about it, like how special it is to be part of that.
Oh, I know. When I
But the
first got
Barter
to Barter,
players, yeah.
yeah.
Go
When
ahead.
when I first got to Barter, one of the first things I had, part of my job was designing the Barter player shows, and so I was told I had to be at a theater I think about an hour away from Barter, to see a performance of a show that I would be redesigning to bring back to the main stage, and so I was seeing the end of a tour. And I got to I was one of the first people to sit in maybe this 500 seat theater, and I'm sitting in the back corner, and all these kids are filing in, and the energy. So when that was one of the few times that I got to kind of experience that because I didn't stay to run the Barter player shows; they're kind of self-programmed and self-contained to run themselves. I was part of the programming, but once they're programmed, I would come in and turn everything on, and I would linger at the theater, almost like a creep, to wait on the energy of the kids to arrive because it would give me energy to get through my day because they're
Yeah,
just so ready and excited to take something in and to be a part of this theatrical process. And
yeah,
it's one of the reasons I often hang out at front of house when I'm working at a theaters because if I feed off of that energy that all of those people that are anticipating something. For many of these people, coming is a very special moment in their lives. It's a tradition that maybe their family does every year, or it's a tradition maybe they do with their special significant other, or it's something that their mom and dad did, and so now that's how they keep their memory alive. And people come from all corners of the globe to come to this little theater in Virginia. The artistic director, are they still doing the furthest distance away?
They sure are,
They are.
yes.
So the artistic director gets on stage during the pre-show and asks who traveled the farthest distance for today's show, and the answers often left my jaw on the floor. You're like, wait, what? Why? It'd be like Australia, New Zealand, and you're
Yes.
like, where did you? How did you end up here? And
Yeah.
it very rarely was even a U.S. state. Many times
Right.
it was a foreign country, or if it was a U.S. state, it was like California or somewhere in the farthest distance. One of my
Yeah.
favorite memories is that two audience members contested that they were very close to the same distance away, and we had to break out the phones in pre-show and determine who was the farthest distance. And I believe maybe the
Yeah.
stage manager chimed in on a god mic to let them know this was in fact the farthest distance to the theater.
Yeah.
So such a place of traditions too. It's a theater kind of full of
Yes.
that tradition and has that heritage that comes before it. And it is something special, right? So talk to me. We've
Yeah.
talked about so many good times. We've talked about so many good things. I want to talk for a second about like maybe the hardest thing you have to go through as a house manager, the roughest thing you have to go through. What challenges, maybe challenge is a good word. What is the most challenging experiences that you have to go through as a house manager? Something that, I'm considering, I want to be a house manager for a career. Is this something I can handle? Or is this what's the
Right.
worst part of the job? And be candid. We're not going to call you out. Don't drop names, but but Judy,
Right.
she's the worst part of this. That one patron. But
Yeah. No.
please share with us about some of those challenges.
I know when I first took this position on, and I was being trained by the current house manager, I asked, "What is the most difficult thing that you've ever dealt with?" Much just like you asked me, and she very candidly and in a funny way, nonchalantly, said, "Well, I had somebody die once." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, hold on." She said, "Yeah, I had somebody die. They had a heart attack, and we had to pull out the defibrillator and uh, followed all the instructions that the thing rattles off to you, and she was able to save this individual's life." So
Wow.
yeah, that's a big one. That's a
Th-
big one. Fortunately, I have not had that experience. But that's always in the sort of, we tuck it away back here because it's not necessarily something we always want to think about. But we always have to be prepared for that sort of thing when it happens, because you just never know. And she was very praised for saving the person's life, but
Absolutely,
also
yeah.
in how much she really followed every single thing. And she's in a moment of almost panic, but being able to calmly handle that situation. There was actually a cardiologist in the audience that sort of rushed in and sort of followed along with this process
Hmm.
and really commended her for how well she handled that. That is a very rare occurrence. I've been here almost 10 years. That has not happened. But we have had times when we've had to get people upstairs into the balcony to get somebody out that may be having some medical issues without stopping the show. And so those sort of things, the biggest, I don't know so much challenge. We had somebody one time, an usher came flying out the door, but still calm. "Kenny, we have a problem." "Okay."
Uh-oh.
"Oh, okay. What's going on?" Well, what is it?" He said, "A kid threw up." I said,
Hmm.
"Oh, okay. Where are they at?" He said, "They're in the second row in the middle."
Oh my
I
lord.
said, "Oh boy." So I said, "Okay." Now, Katie Brown happened to be in the house. It was pretty close to the start of the show. So she just sort of stayed behind to sort of see the start of the show. And she came out and said, "What's going on?" She could tell something was afoot. And I explained, and she said, well, do we stop the show? What do we do? So we came up with a game plan. We got the child out of there, and we did have to stop the show. But the show went on after we got him out of there. But part of the house management, part of that was, communicating. But once again, that rapport with the stage manager, communicated with the stage manager of, we're going to need to stop the show. Or, well, I gave them the option. I explained the situation as quickly as I could because they're still running the show.
Right. Yeah. They don't have time to talk.
They don't have time to talk. So it's pretty much like, okay, a kid vomited, second row in the middle. Do we want to stop to get him out? Or do we want to disrupt everybody while we get this kid out of here? We're going to have to clean it up because he's done this on people. So the decision was to stop the show for a little bit and take care of that situation. And my awesome ushers helped me get it cleaned up and all that. But that sort of thing has happened a few times. Yeah. Sometimes not always having to stop the show. But I think in those, just that sort of thing might be the most challenging, some might say. Just sort of having to think on your feet and just go through things calmly. Okay, how do I handle this situation calmly? That's and right. Make sure the audience is still able to have a good time and all of that.
It's almost, how can I do this without affecting anything? Like, how can I make as little impact and make sure everything continues and be as stealth as possible about this?
Yes, stealthy, absolutely.
And hopefully, half the audience has no clue anything's happened at all, or most of the audience has no clue anything's going down. Except those moments when you have to be like, ladies and gentlemen, we're stopping the show. That only happened a couple of times during my tenure there. One, the power went out. Do you remember the
I would love to talk about that. Please, let's talk about that. Yes.
Was that in the heat of the night?
In the heat of the night. That was one of this question may be coming up, so sorry if it's stepping on a question, but it is a great time to talk about one of the most fun experiences that just sort of happened is exactly this. In the heat of the night, the power went out. Now, the power rarely goes out.
It does. That's right.
Very much to the thanks of Richard Rose, who had them put us on a different line than the rest of the town.
That's right. Yes. Everywhere in town could be without power. And Barter would be like, the show goes on. Yeah.
That's right. So, but the power went off and it stayed off. Now, this happens so infrequently. We're taking to the policy book. Okay, power outage. What are we doing? Oh, a call session. Okay. Well, by this point, we're supposed to wait a certain amount of time. And that time had passed. And do we cancel the show? That's
a lot of money on the line if you're refunding
20 minutes left of the show, I think.
Yeah, we were deep in the second act.
Yeah, this was happening both in unison for the heat of the night at Gillum, and then also at Smith.
Yeah, so I don't remember what show theaters, was there, but yeah,
Smith Theaters doing Richard III.
Oh, the fight show, yeah.
A big fight show. They've totally revamped the theater.
They have. They're like fighting over your heads, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was crazy.
It was like a Disney theme park ride of a Shakespeare show.
Oh, it was wild. So both shows, the stage managers and the house manager came to the conclusion that we would continue the shows. And thankfully, we had a lot of handheld lights and stuff to help illuminate. And then we also encouraged the audience, and this is where it really was special. We had the audiences, you never hear this because, boy, you better behave with your cell phone. Please keep it in your pocket. That is another part of the house manager's duties, ensuring that patrons are not on their phones and things like that, or tackling. Let's not use that word. Let's reword that.
You heard it here first, folks.
Well, no, we're going to edit that. We're going to edit that for that. Good Lord. That is another part, of course, of being a house manager is making sure people stay off their cell phones and things like that. So it was really quite interesting for us then to encourage Folks, if you'll take your cell phones out, please, and turn your flashlights on so we can
Point
illuminate the
them at the
stage in
stage.
order to finish this show. Of course, there was a live gunshot in the show
There
that we
was,
didn't do because of it. But we were able to still do the show. The audience was more engaged than ever because they were
illuminating the show quite
point.
Literally.
Both the ushers and the audience. It was a really cool experience, and I understand they did the same thing over here with it. So, wow.
Me and Andy sat in the balcony. Andy was the lighting designer for the show, and we hadn't had these shows. We may have been in like first or second or third performance. Like they hadn't been open that long. And so he was still around during the performance, and he came running with two, like, I don't know what else to call them. I'm from Mississippi. Deer hunting spotlights, the wireless, like the battery charged spotlights. He came running with two of those, and he was like, okay, you get this character, you get this character. And then he'd look at me and go, switch to them. And so we spotlighted the rest of the show, and that combined with the audience's cell phones, we got through the rest of the show. And in fact, it worked for In the Heat of the Night, and I'm sure it worked well for Richard as well because of the kind of style of the show. In both cases, it was like just as riveting of a show with none of the technology happening, none of the sound cues and all the, and it really was a moment where you were like, oh yeah, this is theater. You don't need all that special stuff. You can still have that special moment. And when we spend so much time getting caught up in all the technology and spending a week in tech, and we spent this much money on the set and this much on costumes, and there are so many people running this show and so many people working on this, and we don't remember, that, hey, it only takes 3 or 4 people to make magic happen, because the human mind's going to do a lot of that for us. And I think that that was a special opportunity, right? I feel lucky to have been there in ways. There are very few moments in my career that I can remember feeling as proud of not only the company, but the audience that said, no, we want to see the rest of the show. Because at that point in our show, we were so far in the second act, they were like, no, you got to tell us what happens. Like, you can't just leave us hanging. I think
it was asked. Didn't stage management ask friends? We can either stop the show and
I think it was
get
even
you to come see this like, another time, or should we continue as best we can? And they all cheered to continue.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, we gave them the option almost, and the audience was like, "No, we got to see the rest of this." That is a very, very special moment. Kenny, I want to talk just one more thing about house management, and this is kind of put at the future, and this will be my last question for the podcast. This is toward future house managers. If I want to be a house manager in the future or work in the front of house field, what should I do now? How should I start that? What would be your like, take this first step, and that's going to be a step in the right direction? I know what I would say, but I want to hear what you would say.
Oh, see, I'm a unique one because I didn't go to school for this. My degree is in communication with a concentration in public relations.
Which is exactly what you do every day.
Said I didn't go to school for this.
You went to school for this, yeah. Right.
Hello.
You just didn't get theater wrote on it, right? So.
Right, exactly. So I didn't go to college as a theater major. But absolutely, I did for public relations, and that is what this is, day in and day out, is making sure that the public are happy. It's not so much the public relations aspect of it, of press releases and things like that. I am.
No, you're one-on-one.
Day in and
release
day
to
out,
Barbara,
one-on-one.
Release to Glenn, release to Judy.
Right.
You're having that personal interaction.
You got it. Yes, it's a one-on-one interaction with each of these individuals, each person that I come in contact, making sure that they are having a good time. And so what would you do? I get as comfortable as you can with people. Make it your mission to how can I be comfortable with people? Because I think that may be a hurdle for some folks. They get a little anxious and, I don't want to talk. But getting that self-confidence in yourself of being able to just to reach out to folks, but then also having the ability to make those connections with
Mm-hmm.
folks. Sort of as I mentioned before, each interaction is an opportunity for you to make sure that they have a great time.
That's right.
And so being sure that, more to your question of what I do now, just practice that in your daily life. We're sort of in a society now where folks don't necessarily talk to strangers or things like that. But I think if you can go out there and make sure just that you're honing your skills on talking to folks, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
just having more one-on-one or little things little small talk things to say to folks. There's times even when I'm scanning tickets that a usher isn't right there at the ready. So well, have you been here with us before? Or where are you from? Or things like that. Just little things to fill those gaps. But at the end of the day, what's house management really comes down to is customer relations, customer service, and making sure they have a great time. So make sure you're honing those skills to really prepare you to do that. Public speaking, a lot of folks are not a fan of it, but there are times even in the lobby you'll need to make an announcement, projecting
Mm-hmm.
your voice of, if I can have everyone's attention, please. We're needing to hold the house. We will open as quickly as we can. We do appreciate your patience, and we'll get back. We'll open as quickly as we can. Just to me, it's not an everyday thing, but it comes natural. But it's something I've been doing for so long that I find speaking in front of an audience. So if that's something that may be a little bit of a hold back for you, just hone that skill. Put yourself in places where you can work on that. And
That's really great advice. My advice
yeah,
was much simpler, which was volunteer as an usher. Most
yes,
professional
that's a
theaters
great
have
way
usher
to.
programs. So if you're near one, if you're not, community theaters usually do the same thing. You usually get to see the show for free. Most of the time, you
Yeah,
even have a chair to sit in if you
yeah.
like, most of the time. Uh,
Sometimes, yeah,
Sometimes, but it's usually a good thing if you don't have a chair to sit in, which means you have a sold out house and there's a
yeah.
great number of people there. But it's a great opportunity to do
That's
exactly what you're talking about, which is
And
great.
it's a
And
great answer. I love that answer. I should have thought of that answer
no, no, no,
because
no. I think
our
you gave the
volunteer
better answer.
ushers, our ushers are so vital to the enjoyment of getting folks to their seats
Hmm.
and sort of being there for them at intermission or if they've got to pop out for a second. And our volunteer ushers are just phenomenal. And one of our house managers, actually, that is how she got her start.
Yeah.
Was two of both. Hi. Two of our house managers actually got their start as volunteers here that then moved up to be house managers because
Right.
they had that experience under their belt. One of them had some experience in the past of being a tour guide.
Hmm.
So, of course, very familiar with interacting with folks and answering questions and things like that. So maybe even if that could be part of an internship or something that you're looking at, a tour guide would be a
Hmm.
great way to slip in some
Getting that one
experience with
on
that
one with
too.
people
Yeah,
and learning to deal
yeah,
with the situation at hand. Very, yeah. I
yeah.
do. I will say that one, I love that you're a great example of a theater professional that does not have a degree in theater. It is often such a harbored industry, and people think differently of you if you try to be a professional without going through theater school. But I can attest to the fact, and I know there are hundreds of other people that will say that Kenny is one of the utmost theater professionals that I know and is working in the industry every single day. And so I love that you're bringing a non theater degree to our industry. And that just shows the width and the breadth of what we're doing. And not every role it has to have a traditional theater school training to contribute to the business model that is really theater. My dogs are
Yeah.
losing their mind, and I'm not even sure why. So, I really love that. Secondly, I do want to say that I love your answer to that. Like get out, talk to people, be a part of that process because that's what a house manager has to do. Everything else is about just knowing the systems, right? If you can communicate, you're going to know where the bathrooms are, how to deal with this issue that this patron's having. All of those are just knowing the policy handbook, as you mentioned, right? Like knowing what the theater's
Yeah.
policies are. But the hardest part of being a house manager to me is like being able to start a conversation with someone you've never met before, you've never exchanged a word with, and just being able to feel like an old friend to them. I know
Yeah.
that you do that regularly, and I know what a hard skill that is. I don't have that skill. I can't walk up to a stranger and just engage in conversation. And those volunteer ushers, especially the ones at Barter, they're like I don't know of any other theater that has the stellar ushers that Barter has. I still think about some of
Yeah.
the ones there often. That contribute regularly to the Barter scene there. Anything
Yeah.
you would like to add in closing or anything you want to talk about? I want to talk about really quickly what shows. This will get dated really quickly on a podcast, but what shows are coming up? What's next up at Barter Theater? Have you announced your next string of
We
shows?
have, before I get into that real fast, I can't help but tell a little fun story
Of
about,
course.
you talked about talking to strangers and things. One of my favorite stories that my grandmother tells about me is that I was little in a grocery store and we were dotting around and I had gotten away from her and went down an aisle and was talking to somebody. And she came around the corner down the aisle and very firmly said, Kenneth Michael, I've told you not to talk to strangers. And I said, Grandma, he's not a stranger. His name's Bob. So from an early age, I was
You have
talking to
never
strangers.
denied your abilities, right? It
That's
came
right.
naturally to you.
Came by that naturally. So our season of shows, we've got a whole lineup. Yes, we have announced all of these tickets are on sale for every single show. We've got a show right now at our smaller Space Smith Theater called Home. Then we've got William Shakespeare's As You Like It. Then Ring of Fire, the music of Johnny Cash. That's always a big hit. And we're so glad that we'll be taking this to actually the very last place Johnny Cash performed, which is the Carter Fold. Not very far, about 45 minutes here from the theater. We'll be doing our final performance of that show there. So very special to be able to do that. We've got another show coming up called Grandma Gatewood Took a Walk. Yes, that Grandma Gatewood that took the walk on the Appalachian Trail. We're definitely off to see the Wizard with the Wizard of Oz. Then the Shawshank Redemption will be in the
Wow.
summer, right? Wizard of Oz and Shawshank Redemption, and also a show about the the joys and less than joyful moments of motherhood, a show called Cry It Out. Then we also have in the fall the play that goes wrong.
Oh, I need to come to Barter for that one. That'll be fun.
Uh, and then also we'll have Sherlock Holmes and the Jersey Lily, and
Ooh.
also the Trip to Bountiful. And then a new show that's actually coming from the Appalachian Festival of Plays and Playwrights. They're doing a reading of it this Sunday, and it's coming from that is going to be a show by our resident playwright, Catherine Bush, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And then,
Ooh.
of course, the traditional classic, but with a little bit of adaptation from our resident playwright, Catherine Bush, A Christmas Carol. So those are the shows for our traditional, our
Right.
barter player, our resident company shows, if you will, those 12 shows throughout the year. And then the barter players are going to be doing Charlotte's Web, Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, Snow White, A Wrinkle in Time, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town, which of course is written by also our resident
Yes.
playwright, Catherine Bush. So we've
That's so
got a great
exciting.
variety of shows coming up for folks to see. And it's always, I know we've talked about our resident company, it's always so nice to see them play the villain in one show, let's say The
Yes.
Wicked Witch, and then across the road playing somebody absolutely saccharine sweet.
Right.
So
Yeah. It's
it's
so
always
much
very
fun.
nice.
And it's
Yeah.
what a great season of shows. Share with our audiences how they get tickets. You can get tickets, of course, on the website.
Right. Bartertheater.com is our website. And then also you can call our box office. Sometimes I'm there too, so you may even get to chat with me. That phone
Hey.
number is 276 628 3991, or also in person.
That's right. And if you're traveling up the I 81 corridor that comes from Knoxville headed toward the nation's capital in DC, Barter is right there. I'm talking about you're 2 minutes off of the interstate. There's good
Yeah.
food. There's hotels there if you'd like to stop and stay the night. There's great nature if you want to go in the summer. There's great hiking. The Creeper Trail is there. There's all kinds of
Yeah.
fun things to do. And you never know when you'll be out to lunch and meet one of the famous Barter resident company members out eating their lunch. They're like local
That's right.
celebrities you can run into.
Yeah.
So I encourage you all to visit Barter Theater. As he said, the Barter Player shows, they're kind of geared towards children and young audiences. So those are performed in the morning when they're performed there at the theater, and then they're on tour quite a bit as well. So all of those shows, you'll have to kind of catch those when they're there at the theater. Most of them do have at least one performance there at the theater, so you'll get a chance somewhere to catch them. But all these other shows, man, what a great opportunity. Barter never does anything small. They never do anything less than just every ounce of energy they can give it, and they give it all of their
Yeah.
energy. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us talking about house management and Barter. I think this was a perfect episode. Kenny, you've been a great guest, and it's been great learning and hearing about all the things happening at Barter and learning more about house management. I think I learned a thing or two tonight myself. As I always tell my listeners at the end of every episode, keep the dialogue dramatic and come back next time where have another guest and we'll be talking about something else theater related here on the Dramatic Dialogue. Thank you so much.